So between me and Satish, we're going to cover a few things. And obviously, as you can see from the title, we're just building upon managing the chaos, specifically around OpenShift and how you manage Kubernetes and all of those things. Satish, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Satish. I'm the director at Ford, working on all things cloud, developer experience, and some other security-led activities.
Yep. Sitaram, Iyer. I lead a team of global architects and also focus on all things emerging from a technology perspective. Couldn't have been less obvious from where I come from. Couldn't find something that fit me very well and be subtle, but yeah, so from CyberArk, as you can see. So what we want to do today, one, talk a little bit about Ford's journey. Obviously, Satish is well placed to talk about that. We also want to spend time talking about what are the various different things from an approach perspective, goals that Ford had set itself for, where we came in and how we sort of work very closely, obviously Red Hat, CyberArk, and all together. The other part that we wanted to really focus on is around automation, specifically around certificate lifecycle and how workload identities are managed and all those things. Those are the sort of the three high-level topics that we have to talk today, and also leave you with some next steps around how you can learn more about what we've been doing.
Cool. Thank you, Sitaram. And I think there was some interesting prelude that Mike and Stu talked about early on. We have been on this journey for a very long time. I think we have seen some of those waves, rise up, starting all the way back from 2013, 2014 timeframe. Things to also mention CoreOS. We started our Kubernetes journey with CoreOS. We started over there, and then it started with whole things around security first, right? So how do we secure? A lot of these systems are running anywhere between our consumer-facing systems to our manufacturing systems. You won't believe some of the systems also drive, updates you get in all the way into your cars, for example. So security was very important to us. We worked on it early on. That was one of the first big effort that we took with security was like, how do we take this new emerging technology that we all call as Kubernetes? I think back in the day, we used to use a product from CoreOS called as CoreOS Tectonic. So that led to many other interesting things, starting with how do we do at scale, right? Many important ones started along this journey was around how do we do a lot of co-engineering work. A lot of the things, since Kubernetes was early on in its journey, we didn't have all the bells and whistles that we need to drive some of those innovations and efficiencies. So we started working very closely with Red Hat, actually. Some of the things that Mike was mentioning is that how do we actually improve the adoption of these environments, but it needs to be safe. It needs to be operate at a certain amount of resiliency and performance characteristics. There's a lot of work that we did with early on with automation, GitOps. I think you will see some of those things percolating here. But it's around 2023, 2024, that's when we started focusing a lot on certificate management, automation. And I think this year exclusively has been, since the beginning of this year, late last year, I would say everything is code. Everything that we do, my teams do, is code.
So as Satish was talking about, one of the challenges specifically around how automation and everything that needed to be brought in, it's also the scale challenge. At Ford, our journey with Ford and obviously directly with Red Hat started just around the time frame on 2023, 2024, where we started looking at it as what is that we can do to, one, ensure that as Ford is managing to scale, how to automate, and two, also make sure that there is a handle on one core problem that Ford was trying to solve and address was outages due to expired certificates, something that you very often don't see very well managed, and that was the point at which we started to work together. And the whole idea was around how do you ensure that one, every single identity, specifically from an X5 9 identity perspective, is automated, and also get rid of anything that has long-lived credentials, specifically the static ones, what is the automation around it, all of those things, right? So that's essentially how we sort of started off. But it's the scale part that is critical here. We're not talking about a small footprint of Red Hat that needed to be managed here. It's a large, really large footprint, right?
I'm like, it's reasonably large. I'm like, I won't probably say it's as big as some of our friends from financial institutions. It's big enough, driving very complex ecosystems, complex manufacturing ecosystems, part distribution systems, warranty systems, to everything in between, right? So we operate in highly regulated industry, so, and also usually become a soft target for interesting actions against us, so, right? So we do have about, I think this is from April, May, earlier this year, counts about right now around just a little north of around 200 clusters, sizable number of application teams that are running on our platforms, a huge number of namespaces, probably at scale where we even break many things, like take Tecton, for example, right? So we basically blow the entire capacity of HCD. So we have to literally create new clusters because HCD is capped at, anybody who runs OpenShift or Kubernetes would know it's capped at 8 gigabytes. So we regularly breach 8 gigabytes, so we have to constantly defragment it or garbage collect it. So at the end of the day, all of this is all about how we do, I think Stu was also talking about earlier around developer experiences, right? All of this, our decades-long journey, is all about hiding complexity and barriers. Because we are everywhere, as we said, we are in multiple clouds, we have multiple physical data centers, we have multiple plant environments, we have products that actually sit in various parts of the ecosystem. We didn't want each environment, each developer to be learning something new. You learn it once, use it over and over again, usually scales very well. It allows us to actually update and upgrade our systems pretty at a rapid clip. So that's one of the important things for us. The more important thing was standardization, right? So we wanted to stick to the open standards. I think Mike was talking about this big CNCF chart of things, of what's out there. But the important thing for us is that, of course, we cannot do every one of those, 200 plus projects. So we had to pick and choose what we do, where we do, and why we are doing it. So standardization was important. The health of the ecosystem was important for us. I think along with this journey, some of the important things was like, how do we keep our costs, I won't say dead bottom low, but manageable, right? So how do we do that? But more importantly is that how can we actually move along with the community at the velocity the community moves, right?
I think as we sort of talk about these goals, automation obviously was one of the things that was core to ensuring that there is a reliable infrastructure that is in place. And part of that, one of the things that we wanted to also highlight is Ford itself has driven a lot of enhancements across multiple different vendors. This is just a list, and the intention was not to talk specifically about any of these things, other than one area that we wanted to spend some time was around newer things around workload identities and workload identity federation. How do you sort of approach the new age of how two workloads can talk to each other and federating access across all of those things. A lot of these things, while we as partners of Ford provide the capability not just to Ford but the rest of other customers as well, but this is just a short list of things that Ford themselves have driven other customers to sort of deliver and do, right? Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit about the architecture and things like that. So this is basically Satish's
so what
favorite
we
thing.
started building, I think about late last year, what we affectionately call it internally as like Ford Cloud Platform, using many of these building blocks, whether it's Red Hat Developer Hub, a lot of the automation coming from CyberArk, previously known as Venafi, and StatStack. But the idea is that how do we build a uniform platform wherein you can come in, you can run containerized workloads, you can run virtual machines, and everything in between, right? So you can run any cloud. We operate in multiple clouds, as I said, multiple locations. But the idea is that how do we build higher level abstractions on top of it? So we built various things, and including a CLI, we call it like Cloud CTL or Cloud Cuttle, something that you want to talk about. And these abstractions, very similar to, I think there were some upstream open source projects like OAM or Dapper. For some of you, you might be following that. So we built our own machineries for all of that stuff. But we host everything through a Red Hat instance of Developer Hub or Backstage. But the goal is that how can you actually get in there so that I can reduce your learning curve. I can actually run diverse infrastructure at diverse locations using a single abstraction pattern, so to speak. The most important aspect of it is that I can't stress enough security. It has to be secure. Everything is keyless. We do not allow secrets in our environments, particularly if you want to incept, talk to various ecosystems. Everything has to be keyless, and I think this is something that we pride ourselves in. There's also a lot of work that needs to be done in the ecosystem, because not everything that we all build is aware of these things. Most importantly is that we want to reduce the downtime. Availability is so critical for us, is that we always say something within the company is like, we want to degrade gracefully. Catastrophic degradation is problematic because our ecosystems are large, our footprint is enormous, and the changes we can cause, the chaos we can cause when our systems go down is impactful. Examples I would say is that a lot of people use phone as key. That means all my systems have to work together. If one of my systems doesn't work or a security breach happens, it impacts a very large swath of partners, customers. So it leaves a very bad imprint on the brand value itself. So it's very important for us. Security is critical. So on the next one, if you go down, it's just another visual. I won't spend too much time in it. Is like when we talked about solution files, this is how one of those looks like, right? How do we actually bring everything together, whether it's OpenShift, ACS, ACM, and CyberArk solutions is like, how do we all stitch it together in a declarative fashion? With just one example how you can do that on Kubernetes, right? So if you go to the next one,
yep.
Sitaram. So I was talking about identities. Everything in our system starts with a source of identity. Our source of identity happens to be in Entra. We use OIDC as a common standard. Everything starts there. We mint a application, a product, a project has an identity. They have people associated with it. We have systems, softwares associated with it. But with that identity, I can federate with everything. That includes cloud, whether it is certificate management, whether it's hardware maintenance, everything starts with an identity. And identity is the only thing that matters, because all infrastructure is provisioned not by Satish, right? So it's provisioned, all the infrastructure is provisioned by Satish. If I were to request infrastructure, not by some random portal who happen to have like elevated rights, right? So in this context, I think this is where Sitaram will take us next, how all of this relates.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when we talked about identity, I think that's been the core focus area from how these infrastructure, everything is managed. We're not talking about something that is stood up once. We know at Ford, everything gets teared down, built as many times. You see the number of OpenShift clusters that they build and tear down. It's completely automated. And every workload, with the federated aspect of what talking to Entra and then making sure that there is a valid identity, that is core to how we want to ensure that everything is identity driven. And when we say identity driven, specifically in this context, is depending on the conversations that you have, either call it a machine identity or a non-human identity, because that's just literally what drives the conversations, specifically around how these workloads talk to each other in OpenShift. And as we sort of look at this from a perspective of why we look at why we need to do it, there's lots of different things. Satish talked about the notion of not having any secrets. Everything has to be keyless. There should be something that determines how something authenticates to another workload and how that access is managed, what authorization rules are in place. Obviously, one important aspect of how that's done. There is also lack of visibility, how you want to get a complete view of all things that exist in a cluster and how you sort of manage it. These were some of the things that drove the entire automation around certificates and secrets and anything that needs to be managed within the organization, right? From an architecture perspective, I think we've touched upon some of these things as we talked about, things like external secrets operator, or even if you're familiar with the Cert Manager project, which is what the primary maintainer that Satish was talking about. We work with CyberArk, who used to be Venafi, who came from JetStack. So there's a lot of history of what we've been doing for a while. So it's still a project that we closely work on, closely manage. So if you are interested in knowing more about Cert Manager, please do stop by. We can talk a lot more about it. But that's essentially is the foundational component that runs in the Ford's OpenShift environment, providing the capability for that aspect of how you manage X509 based authentication and also authorization across all of those things. So leveraging Cert Manager, having a policy framework and a governance model built into it. Obviously, there are other additional components that support and provide all of the other areas around visibility and things like that. But predominantly from the perspective of how you think about automation, that picture for the large part represents how things specifically around identity is managed. I mean, there is the federation to Entra because the cluster OIDC is used in some ways to ensure that there is that federation. But for most part, you can imagine that every time a cluster is stood up, every one of these aspects of an identity that is issued, an identity that is renewed, all of it is 100% automated. And it's also important to sort of look at it from another perspective, because there is also a lot of things that have been changing from a CAP forum perspective. Many a times when you look at a certificate, for example, you see that many a times they are valid for 1 year, or sometimes somebody just mints it for a longer duration, or 90 days, or whatever it is. But that thing is changing a lot. And we spent time with obviously Satish and his team, and a lot of it had to do with how we are thinking about that. And at some point I asked, what does 47-day this mandate mean? And the answer I got, I literally just put it in the slide as the response I got. We don't really care. That was the response I got, right? So go ahead, Satish.
I think I remember this thing. I think Arthur sitting over here, I'm like, we're talking about, hey, our certificates last around 1 year. I said, no, we are not doing that. We are doing it for 90 days, right? So I think it's interesting that Browser Forum recently said, I think very soon, I believe next year, it'll be reduced to 47 days and things like that. For us, it really genuinely doesn't matter, because all it is literally is one configuration in our environments. It might as well be 2 hours. So, but the important thing is, like, in order to get to that point, there's a lot had to be done so that we can actually do that thing and live up to those particular requirements and standards.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Over here on the right side of the room, left side of the room, if you're facing the stage. But I have a question for you. So when you were talking about the policy sync, is that being done on change or on a more scheduled basis?
It is change-based. It can be schedule-based as well, where you're driving a policy, because there are multiple personas. You can imagine there's a security persona who wants to apply a broad change of policies that basically says, at this point, I'm going to apply a policy that changes potentially what CA should be used, or how a secret should be rotated, or what it is, and that could be a policy that is pushed. In some cases, it's basically an adaptation of something happening that evolves over a policy that is driven in the cluster itself. So there are 2 different ways to do it.
Okay, and we do have a question from the audience.
Hi, I'm Beth Pariseau, Informa Tech Target. I'm a senior reporter. Just wanted to ask, this presentation was actually refreshingly free of AI, but I wanted to find out, does this set the stage in any way for more AI automation in the platform? Do you use or plan to use any of the Lightspeed products from Red Hat, that kind of thing?
I'll start with that, and I'll. Yes, so we did Yes, you're absolutely right. For some reason, we didn't use the acronym AI in this because we were just trying to focus on the aspect of what we were trying to talk about. But from a perspective of how we look at workload, and Satish and I have had this conversation a few times already. For us, a workload is a workload. A workload could be a containerized application. A workload could be an AI agent. A workload could be an agentic AI, which is essentially something that is performing a lot of different tasks. And from an identity perspective, we look at all of them needing an identity, whether a workload needs an identity, or an AI agent needs an identity, or agentic AI needs an identity. Each one of them have to have a well-established controls around what it can do, what privileges it has, and how it can actually execute the task that has been assigned. So that governance model extends just as it would be applied to a containerized application to AI agents and agentic AI as well.
I think there are two parts to it, right? So the reason we didn't talk about AI is we believe that in order for AI to be successful, you need a foundational infrastructure. You talk about MCP servers, you talk about all Lightspeed and other new features coming into Red Hat ecosystem. But if you do not have a foundational system that is actually automated, self-healing to a certain extent, and always up to date. For example, I think Amy was mentioning about OpenShift 420. We are running OpenShift 420, right? So it just came out last week. But for us to do that and be successful with AI, we need infrastructure that is actually always up to date, latest, greatest. And the other part that we need to go along with is identities. Can't have usernames, can't have passwords, we can't have X59 certificates that are long-lived, that are minted, or not trustworthy. Because these AI systems are integrated systems, so you need a way to actually govern who has access, what he has access to, using what credentials, right? All of those needs to be governed. And that is where policies, workload identity, keyless authentication, once you have those foundational elements, AI becomes much more approachable and safe. Because at some point, you do not want it to hallucinate and cause RM minus RF on your entire cluster, right? So that's where we stand.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Yep, we have one more question. Up, two more.
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. My name is Brent Ellis, I'm from Forrester Research. I am curious, so it seems like you have a lot of dependency on Entra-ID in Azure as far as identity management. And what happens if those services are unavailable or are broken? Do you guys cache identity? How does that work?
Interesting question. We just had this issue last week, isn't it? So yes, certain systems can actually work. Take, for example, OpenShift, right? When there is an event with any service providers, OpenShift, for example, workloads running on the OpenShift will continue to work. It's just that you may not authenticate to be able to with OpenShift itself, right? If you are federating with, let's say, Entra in this case. But you can always invoke a break glass procedures. There are multiple ways to invoke break glass procedures in OpenShift or any workloads running in the OpenShift itself. So for us, it is a given that any system failure is built in. We can't assume that there will not ever be a failure. We have to assume there will be a failure. Some of our remote locations have very narrow band, pipes. So we have to assume that we don't have high-speed networks. We have to assume that we will not have reachability to certain things and certain critical systems. So they should be able to work for some amount of time independently of those not having a persistent connection. So that's the built-in assumption that we make in our systems. And I guess we were able to survive to a large extent. A couple of stringage outages, whether it started with Azure, AWS, and GCP, so on and so forth. Yep.
And then a follow-on question. So there was an issue a couple of years ago where a signing certificate was stolen from a CA. How would you guys address that problem, as far as invalidating your cache certificates?
Yeah, I'll address that. That is also a scenario that we always talk about. So I think there are a couple of ways we have addressed. I think we've reduced the amount of the validity of the certificates itself. For a large part, we say for issue an identity, an X509 identity to a workload as long as the workload is running. If the workload doesn't need it, you shouldn't have that identity just sitting around there. So the signing certificate or the private keys are something that is architected in a way where they never leave the component itself. It's just sitting there. So the chances of breaching or accessing a signed certificate doesn't exist anymore, at least in a Ford environment. Because we bootstrap with an intermediate that is backed by HSM, that signs all the things, and for most part, it's so short-lived that in some cases we're issuing 1 hour identities, right? So the certificates themselves are hour-long. But as we are also approaching the whole idea around workload identity federation, you're looking at it to exchange an X509 based proof of procession that will ensure how federation works, exchange an X509 for a JOT token and use that JOT token, not just the standard JOT token, but with the CNF claims and everything built in because X509 backed. So to eliminate all the things around, what could potentially happen if a signing certificate is stolen, because anybody can mint certificates if a signing certificate is available. So we just eliminate the signing certificate being available itself for anybody.
I think the other aspect to that would be is that if you use the features baked into Kubernetes, right? So we talk about service accounts. When you integrate with external identity provider, any provider, whether it's Google, Azure, AWS, one of the members of my team did a talk last year at KubeCon when we showcased this part, is like the service account credential itself rotates at a very fast clip. Kubernetes gives you that capability. Now you just federate with an external identity, whatever identity provider you trust. Another great aspect of it would be is that I'm not sure that I'm talked about it, is like SPIFFE Inspire. That's another great open source CNCF project. If you take that thing and now all of a sudden you can actually spread your trust domain all over the place. Now you can say, hey, who is the trustworthy parties? And in that scenario, you don't even have to worry about the certs expiring. If they do expire, if they are compromised, you can rotate them off because you have the infrastructure and the machinery in place to turn it around at a fast clip.
Thank you.
And let's get this one last question, and then we will move on to the next talk.
Hi, I had a question. Ford mentioned earlier, if it's not in code, it's not in our platform. My question is, how do you balance your automation workload, whether it's AI or whatever automation pipeline, with human oversight, especially if your policies themselves, if they're as code and they get misconfigured, they could introduce risk to the system?
Sure. I think we talked about some of the things as policy as code. We use many policy engines, like there's one great open source project, Kaiwano, if somebody has used it. There's also an open machinery, but we tend to use Kaiwano. Simple things like we will not let you run singletons. It's just a random example, right? Or we will not let you run as root. We will not let you mount this thing, right? How do you prevent it? We have a policy that will stop you workloads from coming into the cluster in the first place. We don't compromise on those things. There are very few finite ones. If anybody has looked Kubernetes hardening guide that NSA has put out there, there's been an extremely good CNCF audit of Kubernetes itself. So if you pick one of those basic building blocks of those, turn them into policy machinery. I think Mike was talking about ACS and ACM. That is also can be used to leverage those. So the idea would be is that if you do not allow bad things to happen, you don't have to worry about the consequences, right? The day you cut those corners, that's when it becomes a problem. So the idea is, why don't you do all the hard work up front? It'll be difficult. It'll be a long journey. But I'm pretty sure if executed correctly, eventually your workloads, your users, your systems, no matter AI or otherwise, they will all learn to appreciate what you have done there.
Admission controllers are pretty powerful,
Yeah.
especially from a policy and governance perspective.
Cool.
Excellent.
I think we are at time.
We are at
Thank
time.
you, Amy.
We've been at
Thank
time
you,
for a
everybody.
while. Excellent. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.